The Goblin and the Huckster. Once upon a time, in a tall, narrow house standing quietly on a cobblestone street, there lived a student in the dusty attic. Beneath him, on the ground floor, was a cozy little grocery shop run by a practical and slightly grumpy grocer. But the most curious resident of the house was a small dwarf who lived tucked behind a shelf in the corner of the shop. This dwarf wasn't like others in fairy tales. He didn't wear a pointy hat or carry a lantern. He was quiet and thoughtful, and every Christmas, the grocer gave him a bowl of warm buttered oatmeal as a token of kindness. In return, the dwarf kept to himself, watching the world from behind jars of honey and barrels of apples. One winter night, as snow whispered against the windows and the wind hummed through the chimney, the student came downstairs to the shop. He had only a few coins in his pocket, just enough to buy a candle and a piece of white cheese wrapped in old paper. As he walked toward the door, he paused. His eyes were fixed on the wrapping paper. There, beneath the waxy layer, was a faded poem, lines written in careful, flowing script. The student held the cheese close and gently unwrapped it, reading the verse with wonder. He turned to the grocer. This is from a book," he said softly. "A real book. You've torn a page from a precious volume just to wrap cheese." The grocer shrugged. "It's just paper. It keeps the cheese dry." The student's face fell. To destroy a book for something so simple? You may know how to weigh flour and pick good apples, but you don't understand poetry, not even a little. Now, this comment would have been forgotten by any ordinary ear. But the dwarf, who had been quietly napping behind a row of jam jars, opened his eyes. He loved the grocer. He gave him food, warmth, and a place to stay. And now, someone had insulted him. That night, when the street was silent and all the stars slept behind clouds, the dwarf crept into the grocer's apartment. His footsteps made no sound. Carefully, he tiptoed to the bedside of the grocer's wife and did something quite strange. With a gentle tug, he took her voice, her very tongue, not in pain or harm, but like a magical key, so he could use it to make things speak. You see, the dwarf had a secret gift. If he placed a human tongue on an object, it would come to life and speak for a short while. He had questions, and he needed answers. First, he walked to the wooden barrel filled with old newspapers and placed the tongue on its rim. "Tell me," he whispered, "what is poetry to you?" The barrel groaned a little and replied, "Poetry? Oh, that's the stuff printed in the corners of newspapers. People clip it out, read it once, then forget. Believe me, I've seen more poems than that student ever will." The dwarf nodded and moved on. He placed the tongue on the butter churn, the cash register, the old flour scoop. One by one, they shared their thoughts. Each object believed it understood poetry. Practical, simple, often sticky with jam or dusted with flour. None of them truly understood its beauty. The dwarf frowned. Something didn't sit right in his heart. He needed to see more, so he tiptoed and up to the attic, where the student lived. He peeked through the tiny keyhole in the old wooden door. What he saw made his breath catch. The room was dim, lit only by the soft flicker of the candle. The student sat hunched over the torn page, his face aglow. But the paper, oh, the paper, it shone brighter than the candlelight. From the poem grew a shimmering tree, right from the center of the page. It spread its golden branches, blooming with flowers that sparkled like morning dew. Some blossoms had deep, gentle eyes. Others had petals as blue as the clearest sky. The tree's fruit gleamed like stars, and from its leaves drifted the sweetest music the dwarf had ever heard. It filled the tiny attic with warmth and wonder. The dwarf sat frozen at the keyhole, mesmerized. He stayed there long after the candle melted away. Even when the student fell asleep, the dwarf could still hear the gentle lullaby of the tree. For the first time in his life, the dwarf felt something bloom in his chest. Awe. "This student," he whispered. "He understands beauty, far more than I imagined." For a moment, he thought about staying in the attic. Maybe he could leave the shop, leave the oatmeal, and sit beneath that magical tree of poems. But then he noticed there was no jam in the student's cupboard, not even a crumb of bread. And so, with a soft sigh, the dwarf crept back downstairs. Before returning the tongue to the grocer's wife, he made sure to whisper gently to every object in the shop. "Respect him," he said. "He sees things none of us can." From that day forward, the entire shop seemed to change. The shelves stood straighter, the bell above the door rang a little brighter, and even the fire in the stove burned warmer when the student passed by. Still, the dwarf's heart felt torn in two. He loved the warmth of the shop, but the attic held a magic that called to him. Often, he would sneak up and peek through the keyhole. He would sit there for hours, watching the student read, lost in the glowing forest of words. One evening, as autumn winds howled and the night grew cold, the candle in the attic flickered out. The music faded. The tree disappeared. The light was gone. The dwarf stayed at the keyhole, his tiny face wet with tears. He didn't know why he cried. He only knew that something beautiful had passed. Later that night, chaos erupted in the streets. Smoke and cries filled the air. A fire had broken out, licking the sky with red fingers. People ran in panic. The grocer's wife clutched her earrings. The grocer grabbed a bundle of old newspapers. But the student was nowhere to be found. The dwarf didn't hesitate. He rushed through the smoke up to the attic. The poem, the tree, the light. He had to save it. He found the torn page, still lying on the table, its glow faint but alive. Gently, he tucked it into his tiny hat, pressed it to his heart, and climbed to the top of the chimney, where he waited until the fire was gone. When the morning came, the house stood charred but standing. The dwarf had a choice to make. Should he stay with the grocer, who offered warmth and food, or live with the student, who offered wonder and beauty, but no jam? He decided on something in between. From that day forward, he belonged to both. He would watch the student from afar and dream of poems beneath glowing trees. But each morning, he returned to the shop for his beloved bowl of buttered oatmeal. After all, even a heart full of poetry still needs breakfast. Moral of the story: our needs shape our choices, but our dreams guide our hearts.